2015's Life is Strange was an adventure game I expected to hate, but ended up liking a lot more than I thought I would. Not in spite of its flaws, but as a beautifully complicated package. While its 2017 prequel, Before the Storm, is a game I wanted to like, but ended up severely disappointed. So much so that I had to put it back on the non-existent digital shelf back in December after only completing the first episode because, damn son, does this prequel manage to miss almost all of the appeal of the original game. My dislike has nothing to do with the removal of the time travel for this entry, mostly since it was pretty underutilized anyway, and without it, the dev team can shift their focus towards telling one cohesive branching story. And credit where credit's due, it's not like there's nothing I like here. The music by Daughter, who I confused with Daughtry for far too fucking long, was fantastic. The OST shifted from the indie folk 2010 sound of the original into a much more angsty garage album fitting for this game without losing any of those calming earworms. Despite disliking her in the original game, the character of Chloe Price is a lot easier to latch onto this time around. Without constantly being written as Max's foil, she was finally able to spread her wings as a more sympathetic character, even as ridiculous as some of her dialogue can be. And seeing her tossed into different situations where her awkwardness shines were some of the brightest parts of the game. But outside of Chloe's character, Before the Storm's story is a series of missed opportunities. It's set 3 years before the original, and is entirely centered on Chloe meeting the most popular girl in Arcadia Bay, Rachel Amber, who was murdered before the first game began at the hands of its main villain, Mark Jefferson, a trusted adult in her life. Except, as Chloe gets closer to her, she begins to realize that Rachel's got a bad side. It's just fucking fire walk with me! I'm not the first to point it out simply due to how blatant it is here, but while the first game took a decent amount of inspiration from David Lynch's series Twin Peaks, Before the Storm borders on copying and pasting. Like Rachel Amber, Laura Palmer is the most popular girl in town and is killed off-screen before the show begins. Slowly, episode by episode, she's revealed to not be the goody two-shoes many knew her to be, and was often manipulative. There's even a direct analog here to the fucking Pink Room, which is now a punk bar our characters spend less than 10 minutes in the first episode. Before we move on, I'd like to make it clear that taking inspiration from another piece of work is completely fine. If that ever becomes a crime in the near future, then I'm already on the FBI's most wanted list. The issue here isn't that one of my favorite shows ever created was used as an influence here. That's fine. Many things have been inspired by Twin Peaks before, even games. It's that the dev team seemingly missed the point of Laura's character in that show, and especially the prequel film Fire Walk With Me, where that film was told from Laura's perspective as she goes through her final days before her inevitable demise. Rachel's entire conflict is finding out that her father is having an affair at the end of episode 1, and then after that she burns down a forest in anger, and then just gets a bit depressed for the rest of the game. Since Before the Storm is centered on Chloe, there's a tunnel vision on the two of them falling in love before Rachel's inevitable murder, simply so it can tie a neat bow around the two games. I get that the original also used Rachel as a Laura Palmer analog, as her disappearance was simply used to get the ball rolling and her body being found is simply meant to help wrap the story up, but as cheap as that is, she was one piece of world building and setup in a narrative that has tons of characters and subplots, all constantly moving around and changing over the course of 15-ish hours. Despite using Twin Peaks as an inspiration, it feels like the writers forgot that the entire point of Laura's character was that nobody knew the real Laura Palmer and what she was truly going through as a result of abuse. And her death is ultimately painted by the film as a release from the pain she'd experienced. I'm not here to compare and contrast two works because that's not the point of what I do here. I bring that up because there is no layer to Rachel, or even follow up on the feeling that she's not being entirely honest. Despite learning in Life is Strange that Rachel was living a double life the whole time. She was preyed upon by Frank and Mark Jefferson, which, to be clear, is not her fault at all. But in that game, she was canonically in love with Jefferson, planned to run away with Frank, and engaged in other unspoken debaucherous behavior, all the while hiding it from Chloe, who kind of hints at having a romantic relationship with her, which understandably makes players very wary of Rachel here, and yet, there's nothing to that, because it all still has to be hidden from Chloe, so the first game makes sense. Lines of dialogue from the original like, Rachel was a battery, both positive and negative, don't really line up with this game's representation since it has to be a love story, despite knowing where it ends. Even ignoring the odd use of iconography and story beats from a work that feels like the writers completely misunderstood, Rachel just doesn't feel like the same character in the universe at all. There's hints at a destructive nature that just sort of fall flat. The biggest example is her starting a forest fire at the end of episode 1 that lasts throughout the entire game, and absolutely nothing comes of that. Outside an optional offhand comment or two from Chloe, there's no consequences despite the story treating it like this big character defining moment. Rachel also convinces Chloe to constantly put herself in danger for her, leading to a confrontation with the very same man who stabbed Rachel at the end of the game. And there's an argument to be made that we're seeing Rachel from Chloe's eyes, but like, she still has to be a likable character and she just isn't here. All of this doesn't make Rachel Amber complicated like the rest of the cast members. It makes her a rich asshole who turns her problems into everybody else's. And the game just sort of shrugs this all off, only to throw in a scene at the very end where it tries to recreate the ending of the first game by lampshading this in a way that feels rushed, to say the least. I really do hate that scene with Elliot, man. It's weird considering the fact that Elliot is talking sense about Rachel and Chloe's manipulative relationship, but he's barely a character in his own right and is also an actual stalker. As much as I wasn't Chloe's biggest fan in the original game, she was nowhere near as unlikable or plainly disinteresting as Rachel is. She stands apart from any character in both of these games because she lacks a personality or even depth outside of having issues with her dad. Her other struggles are generally vague, often chalked up to just being the popular straight-A student, with no scenes about how it really affects her. Save for one where she's almost drugged that's played for laughs? Don't worry, I'll get there. Rachel has little to no character, so the story's focus seems to be on Chloe. It is her game after all, but the majority of the narrative is all about Chloe helping solve Rachel's problems. So what you end up with is a Scooby-Doo chase scene from hell, just attempting to find the point behind this game's existence. Where this gets worse is when the story ramps up to its third act. Buckle the fuck up. Rachel's father, the district attorney, is having an affair, except he isn't. The woman he's meeting, Sarah, is Rachel's birth mother, and the two of them are arguing over custody like you usually do, since her mother was once a drug addict who seems to also know Frank, Chloe's drug dealer, as well as his business partner Damon, who seems to physically assault children for fun. Except Damon is really working with Rachel's father on the side to try and kill Sarah, and also the public doesn't know that the DA's daughter has a drug-addicted birth mother despite being clean for over a year. And killing her will definitely make things more complicated, but whatever. Eventually there's a final showdown where Chloe's knocked out, Damon is killed by Frank off screen, and Sarah asks Chloe to keep this all a secret from Rachel so that she can have a happy life at home, since her dad was protecting his daughter from something. Then, if you didn't ask for Rachel's bracelet in episode 2, despite her saying in-game that she refuses to ever take it off, Sarah will leave Arcadia Bay forever without seeing her daughter. Despite the fact that there was the entire inciting incident of the plot. Double twist, almost all of this happens in the final episode that only comes out to about an hour and a half long. Obviously this ending was very rushed, which seems to be a running theme here, mainly since episodes 1 and 2 are entirely focused on building Chloe and Rachel's relationship, as well as simply offering fan service. Chloe getting the blue streak in her hair and donning her boots is framed as the Life is Strange equivalent of Vader showing up in Rogue One, I shit you not. That's not all the previous episodes are, I don't want to be unfair. Chloe's dream sequences centered on her grieving process over losing her dad did a fantastic job of capturing that loss, and was able to avoid retreading old ground. That final scene where she accepts that she'll never get to know all the answers about her father, but still love him all the same, was beautiful. As a high school theater kid, the ridiculousness of how serious everyone took the play in episode 2 was almost entirely on point, and made me wish that stuff like that was the larger focus of this game. The new characters, Steph and Mikey, were great additions, and despite running on for a bit too long, I liked the D&D play sessions with them. I love the character of Skip, a security guard at Blackwell who moonlights as the lead singer of a band called Pisshead, who ends up making some of my favorite tracks in the game. The story of both Mikey and Drew, Mikey's older brother, who's just a more sympathetic version of Nathan, trying to help their homeless father, but in the process risking Drew's scholarship, had me invested, regardless of how little time it showed up in the game. because all of this stuff makes up for less than 25-30-ish% of the game. Skip, Steph, Mikey, and Drew all show up like 3 times in the game each, with the latter 3 all being in the same final scene. The focus here is on Rachel's story, as well as returning characters like Nathan, Victoria, and David. Some of these inclusions make sense, like Principal Wells and Frank, who's important because he would lust after an 18-year-old in his 30s who he met when she was 15. But especially when it comes to characters like David and Nathan, caring about them and their arcs feel entirely reliant on the audience getting attached to them in the first game. Having old characters return is not an issue. They can add a sense of familiarity in a world full of a new cast. However, in Before the Storm, the new cast is often shunned to make way for these old characters. These aren't short cameos that I'm complaining about. Nathan gets almost as much screen time as Drew, who is the focal point of the main subplot. The addition of familiar characters like Victoria, David, and Nathan feels like it juxtaposes the setup of Chloe being thrust into this entirely different part of the town that she's never explored. Except for the bar at the beginning of the first episode, or Rachel's house, Chloe mostly ends up going to the same places and meets most of the same people that Max would just 3 years later. The issue isn't just that the characters are here, it's that it all feels off. If anything, these inclusions leave more questions. Where is Samantha, the girl who pines after Nathan all 3 episodes? Wouldn't she end up playing a bigger part in Nathan's story in the original game? Was she killed by him and Mark Jefferson like Rachel was? Hint, there's no fucking answer. There's an entire arc of Chloe and David not getting along, which is the same as the first game. By the end of Before the Storm, the 2 of them can become somewhat civil, with Chloe encouraging the 2 of them after they get engaged, which chronologically makes the physical assault at the beginning of episode 1 feel completely out of place. Relationships do change and fall apart, but this just makes the inclusion of Chloe and David's arc here and its importance for Chloe as a character feel needless. There's a scene that I mentioned earlier in the video where Victoria attempts to drug Rachel so that she can take over the main role in The Tempest, only for her and Chloe to trick Victoria into drugging herself, complete with a scene of her comedically slurring her words and then a cutaway of her being passed out that's meant to make you laugh. And if we're gonna be confessing the truth here, I laughed my ass off, but considering what happens to her, Rachel, Chloe, Max, and lots of other girls in this universe, it feels in bad taste, to say the least. All of these fucking creative decisions feel completely out of whack. This can all be chalked up to a switch in developers, since Before the Storm wasn't developed by Don't Nod, but by Deck 9. And it's here where I need to put a big disclaimer. I began making this video well before the very recent allegations of Deck 9 having a very toxic work environment, as well as allegedly having white supremacist sympathizers on their payroll. If you want to learn more, the amazingly well written IGN article is in the description, but brace yourself because damn. Before the Storm would be Deck 9's first attempt at a Life is Strange game, and while Don't Nod would return for the direct sequel, after that they'd completely leave the series behind with Squeenix and Deck 9, who would go on to make True Colors and this pretty shit remaster of 1 and Before the Storm. One of the biggest reasons to leave the series behind in the first place was Don't Nod having to bend to Square Enix's will since they own the IP. Which makes sense considering all the issues developers from both teams have cited, including the publisher attempting to prevent Life is Strange from becoming known as a gay game, despite almost every installment having, at the very least, bisexual protagonists. Never have I ever heard of a publisher so clueless as to who the fuck their main demographic is. I'm not bringing this up just to drag both the developer and publisher through the dirt. The majority of the issues at Deck 9 with Before the Storm's head writer, Zach Garris, would allegedly occur during the development of True Colors and the unknown 4th installment anyways. Instead, I'm bringing this up because it felt like Square Enix wanted to simply capitalize on the success of the first game. Mind you, it was made for very cheap, almost a 1/4 of the cost of Don't Nod's previous game, Remember Me, which ironically nobody remembers, and Life is Strange would sell over 1 million copies before the 4th episode even released. Any passion here would be drowned out by the attempt to make money over anything else. Hell, the voice actor for Chloe, Ashley Birch, a fellow Arizonian, had to be recasted because Before the Storm was made during a fucking voice actor strike. Major yikes alert. Even Deck 9's remaster of Before the Storm is somehow worse than the first, despite both being in the same package. Sure, the ending cutscene audio works this time around, but all of them were unwatchably glitchy. The lighting is completely broken, stepping into the sun makes it look like the white balance is off in a video game. Subtitles would randomly stop working, audio didn't sync at all, and would sometimes cut out entirely.
Whatever it takes.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
I'm not saying that Deck 9 missed the ball entirely. There's clearly some good stuff in Before the Storm. It's just that all of it doesn't get a chance to shine in a way that's uniquely upsetting. For a bit, it made me believe that Life is Strange is just one of those games where the magic can't be recaptured. And while, yes, that game is lightning in a bottle, Before the Storm was able to get some stuff right, but not enough to make it worth replaying, buying this remaster, or even finishing for anyone who hasn't yet. It's a frustrating disappointment, not because it has things that I don't like. There's plenty of great games that are rough around the edges, including their stories. It's a disappointment because it lacks an identity. It feels like it was made just because Deck 9 had the lowest asking price to develop it, and not because they had a great vision on what type of story they wanted to tell here, outside of Chloe falling in love with Rachel. And for most people, that's all that they wanted, and all the more credit to them. Will Deck 9 get better at making Life is Strange titles? I don't know. And to be honest, I'm kinda scared to see where the series goes from here. Don't forget to share this on Tumblr.
All 3 limited edition Domo Slurpee collector cups and fill them with Fanta Wild Cherry or the limited time only Fuji Frost, only at 7-Eleven stores.
Fast is fun. Fast is knowledge. Fast is possibility. That's why Cox is introducing its Cox